The scream pierced through the elegant Fifth Avenue cafe like a knife cutting through silk. "Stop those kids! They're stealing from Mr. Harrison's table." Two small figures, identical twins with dirt-smudged faces and threadbare grey shirts full of holes, were sprinting through the outdoor seating area of the Milano Bistro, clutching croissants and sandwiches against their chests like precious treasures. Their worn-out sneakers slapped against the wet pavement as autumn rain began to fall over Manhattan. Marcus Harrison looked up from his laptop, his steel-grey eyes narrowing as he watched the commotion unfold. The 42-year-old real estate mogul was used to chaos in his billion-dollar empire, but this was different. These weren't corporate rivals or ambitious competitors. These were children, no older than 8, running for their lives with food stolen from his table. "Sir, should I call security?" His assistant Jennifer reached for her phone, her manicured nails hovering over the screen. "No!" Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, but something in his chest tightened as he watched the two boys weave between tables. They moved with practiced precision, like they'd done this before, many times before. "I'll handle this." He stood, his 6'2" frame casting a long shadow across the bistro terrace. His navy Armani suit was immaculate, his Italian leather shoes probably worth more than most people earned in a month. The contrast between him and those two running children couldn't have been starker. Marcus moved quickly but deliberately, his long strides eating up the distance between them. The twins had made it to the corner of 52nd Street when one of them, the slightly smaller one, tripped over a raised section of sidewalk. He went down hard, skinning his knee on the concrete, and the sandwich he'd been carrying flew from his hands, landing in a puddle. The other twin immediately stopped, turning back despite the danger. "Ethan, get up! We have to go!" The standing twin's voice cracked with panic and desperation. "My knee, Evan, it hurts!" Ethan clutched his leg, tears streaming down his dirty face, mixing with the raindrops that were now falling steadily. Marcus reached them just as Evan was trying to pull his brother to his feet. Up close, he could see details that made his stomach twist. The dark circles under their eyes, the way their clothes hung loose on too thin frames, the desperate hunger in their expressions. These boys weren't just poor, they were starving. "Going somewhere?" Marcus's voice was quieter than he'd intended, less accusatory than curious. Both boys froze. Evan positioned himself protectively in front of his injured brother, his small fists clenched, his chin raised in defiance despite the fear in his hazel eyes. "We're sorry, mister. We'll pay you back someday, I promise." Marcus crouched down, bringing himself to their eye level. Rain soaked into his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to notice. He was studying their faces with an intensity that made both boys uncomfortable. There was something familiar about them, the shape of their eyes, the curve of their jawlines, even the way they stood with their shoulders squared despite their fear. "Why did you take the food?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now. "Our mum." Ethan started, then bit his lip, looking at his brother uncertainly. "She hasn't eaten in 3 days." Evan finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "She gave us her last meal. She's sick, and we don't have money, and—" His voice broke, and he looked away, ashamed. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd built around his heart over the years. "Where is your mother now?" The boys exchanged glances, clearly debating whether to trust this wealthy stranger who had every right to have them arrested. Finally, Evan spoke. "Under the bridge, the one by the Hudson River Park. She's too weak to move much anymore." The rain was coming down harder now, and Marcus noticed both boys were shivering. He made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "Come with me." "Are you calling the cops?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "No." Marcus stood, then did something that surprised even himself. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over both boys' shoulders. "I'm taking you back to the restaurant. You're going to sit down and you're going to eat a proper meal. And then we're going to go find your mother." "Why?" Evan asked suspiciously. "Why would you help us? We stole from you." Marcus paused, studying these two identical faces that stirred something deep and painful in his memory. "Because," he said slowly, "I think I know what it's like to lose everything that matters." Back at the Milano bistro, Marcus ignored the stares and whispers as he led the two bedraggled boys to his private corner table. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock, but one look from Marcus silenced any protest. He ordered practically half the menu: grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, pasta, fresh bread, chocolate milk, and apple pie. As the boys ate with the desperate hunger of the truly starving, Marcus watched them carefully. With each passing minute, the nagging familiarity grew stronger. The way Evan tilted his head when he was thinking, the small dimple in Ethan's left cheek when he smiled tentatively at the food. The exact shade of their hazel eyes, a mix of green and gold that he'd only seen in one other person. "What are your full names?" Marcus asked suddenly. Evan looked up, a smear of tomato soup on his chin. "Evan and Ethan Carter." Carter. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. His grip tightened on his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. "And your mother's name?" "Sarah," Ethan said. "Sarah Carter. Do you know her?" Marcus couldn't breathe. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman he'd loved with everything he had. The woman he'd lost 9 years ago when ambition and pride had driven them apart. The woman who'd been 3 months pregnant when she'd walked out of his penthouse apartment, tears streaming down her face, telling him she couldn't raise a child with a man who loved money more than family. He'd never known she'd gone through with the pregnancy. He'd tried to find her in those first few months, but she'd disappeared completely. And eventually, his wounded pride had convinced him to stop looking. He'd thrown himself into building his empire, becoming one of the youngest billionaires in New York, filling the emptiness with acquisitions and deals and the hollow praise of people who only valued his money. And now, sitting across from him, eating soup with trembling hands, were his sons, his children. 8 years old, give or take. The timeline matched perfectly. The familiar features weren't a coincidence. These boys were his. "Mr. Harrison?" Jennifer's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Are you all right? You look pale." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Boys, finish your food, quickly. We need to go find your mother right now." "Is something wrong?" Evan asked, picking up on the urgency in Marcus's voice. Everything was wrong. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved, all the success and wealth and power, none of it mattered. He'd had a family, children, and he hadn't even known. And while he'd been living in his luxury penthouse, sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets and closing multi-million-dollar deals, his sons, his own flesh and blood, had been living on the streets, stealing food to survive. "Nothing's wrong," Marcus lied, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite control. "Everything's going to be fine. I promise you that. But we need to hurry." The rain had turned into a downpour by the time they left the restaurant. Marcus had Jennifer call his driver, and within minutes, his black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The boys hesitated at the sight of the luxury vehicle, but Marcus gently urged them inside. Hudson River Park, the underpass near Pier 84. Marcus instructed his driver, Thomas, who'd been with him for 7 years and knew better than to ask questions. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan, Marcus stared at the 2 boys sitting beside him. Evan had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted and finally warm, his head resting against the leather seat. Ethan was struggling to stay awake, his eyes drooping as he fought against the comfort and safety he probably hadn't felt in months. "Sir," Ethan said softly, "you didn't have to do this. The food was enough, more than enough." Marcus looked at this brave little boy who'd protected his brother, who'd stolen food for his dying mother, who'd probably grown up too fast and seen too much. "Yes," he said quietly, "I did have to do this." Because these were his sons. And he'd already missed 8 years of their lives. He wasn't going to miss another minute. The Mercedes came to a stop near Pier 84, and Marcus could see the dark shadows of the underpass through the rain-streaked windows. This part of the Hudson River Park, usually filled with joggers and tourists, was deserted in the downpour. Under the concrete bridge, barely visible in the grey afternoon light, were scattered shapes, makeshift tents, cardboard boxes, the forgotten people of New York's glittering success story. "Stay in the car with Thomas," Marcus instructed Jennifer, who'd insisted on coming along. Then he turned to the boys. "Show me where she is." Ethan and Evan led him through the rain, their small hands gripping his arms as they navigated the slippery grass slope down to the underpass. The smell hit Marcus first, a mixture of dampness, unwashed bodies, and desperation. He'd written checks to homeless charities, attended fundraising galas, but he'd never actually been here, never seen this reality up close. "Mum's over there," Evan whispered, pointing to a corner where a faded blue tarp was rigged up against the concrete wall. As they approached, Marcus could hear coughing, deep, wet, rattling coughs that spoke of serious illness. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. 8 years since he'd seen her face, heard her voice, held her in his arms. "Mom, we're back," Ethan called out softly. "And we brought help." The coughing stopped. There was a moment of silence, then a weak voice that Marcus recognized instantly despite its frailty. "Boys? Thank God. I was so worried when you didn't come back." Evan pulled back the tarp, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. Sarah Carter sat propped against a rolled-up sleeping bag, wrapped in a thin blanket that had seen better days. Her once vibrant auburn hair was dull and tangled, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face, which Marcus had once thought was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, was gaunt and pale, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. She'd lost at least 30 pounds, maybe more, and her clothes, a faded sweatshirt and jeans with holes in the knees, hung on her like she was a child playing dress-up. But her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 8 years, those were the same. And right now they were widening in shock and disbelief as they locked onto Marcus's face. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "No, this can't be. Marcus." He couldn't speak, couldn't move. All his carefully constructed walls, all his business acumen and strategic thinking, everything that had made him successful, it all crumbled in the face of seeing her like this. Sarah, his Sarah, living under a bridge, dying by the look of her. "Mum, he helped us," Evan said excitedly, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "He didn't call the cops and he gave us food, and he said he'd help you too." Sarah tried to stand, but she was too weak. She made it halfway up before her legs gave out, and Marcus moved on instinct, catching her before she hit the ground. The moment his arms wrapped around her, feeling how thin she was, how fragile, something inside him shattered completely. "Don't!" Sarah gasped, trying to push him away, but she had no strength. "Don't touch me. You can't be here. You can't—" "Sarah." His voice broke on her name. "What happened to you? How did this— Why didn't you tell me?" She laughed, but it turned into another coughing fit. Marcus held her through it, feeling each convulsion shake her fragile frame. When she finally caught her breath, she looked up at him with eyes full of pain and anger, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Tell you?" she said bitterly. "Tell you what, Marcus? That I was pregnant? I did. Remember? And you told me that a baby would complicate things, that you weren't ready for that kind of responsibility, that your career was at a critical point and you needed to focus." The words hit him like physical blows. He remembered that conversation, but not like this. He'd been 29, on the verge of his first major real estate deal, working 18-hour days. When Sarah had told him she was pregnant, he'd panicked. He'd said things, terrible things, in the heat of fear and ambition. "I was scared," Marcus said, his voice raw. "I was young and stupid and scared, and I said things I didn't mean. But I tried to find you. After you left, I looked everywhere. For 3 months, Sarah interrupted. You looked for 3 months, and then you gave up. I know because I was watching. I saw you throw yourself into your work, saw you on magazine covers and at galas, with different women on your arm. You moved on, Marcus. You always were good at that." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Sarah's voice rose, though it was still weak. "You want to talk about fair? I gave birth to our sons alone in a charity hospital. I raised them by myself, working 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. And when I got sick, when the medical bills started piling up and I lost my jobs and we lost our apartment, where were you? In your penthouse, probably closing another billion-dollar deal." Ethan and Evan were watching this exchange with wide, confused eyes. Marcus realized they were starting to understand something significant was happening, something beyond a kind stranger helping a homeless family. "Boys," Sarah said, her voice softening despite her obvious exhaustion, "go wait by the car, please. I need to talk to this man alone." "But, Mom," Evan started. "Now, please." There was still authority in her voice, the kind only a mother could summon even in the worst circumstances. The twins hesitated, but eventually trudged back toward the Mercedes, looking over their shoulders with worried expressions. Once they were out of earshot, Sarah sagged against Marcus, too tired to maintain her defiant posture. "They're beautiful," Marcus said quietly. "Our sons, they're incredible, Sarah. The way they protect each other, the way they tried to take care of you." "They shouldn't have to," Sarah interrupted, fresh tears streaming down her face. "They're 8 years old, Marcus." 8. They should be in school playing soccer, having playdates, not stealing food to keep their mother alive. "What's wrong with you?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Medically, I mean. That cough." "Pneumonia," Sarah said flatly. "At least that's what the free clinic doctor thought. Could be worse. I haven't been able to afford the tests to find out for sure. Had it for about 6 weeks now, getting worse every day." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. Rage at himself, at the circumstances, at the cruel universe that had brought them to this point. "You're coming with me, right now. You and the boys. I'm taking you to Mount Sinai, to the best doctors in New York." "No!" Sarah's voice was firm despite her weakness. "What do you mean, no? Sarah, you're dying. Look at you. You can barely sit up. You're living under a bridge. Our sons are starving." "Our sons?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Now they're our sons. For 8 years they were just my sons, my responsibility, my burden to carry alone. And I did carry it, Marcus. I carried it with everything I had until I had nothing left." "I know." Marcus's voice cracked. "I know. And I'm sorry. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I failed you. I failed them. I failed at the only thing that really mattered, and I can't ever take that back. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. I'm not walking away again." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. "You really didn't know about them?" "I swear on everything I have, I didn't know. If I had known—" He stopped, his throat tight with emotion. "I would have been there. I would have moved heaven and earth to be there for you, for them. Would you?" Sarah asked quietly. Or would you have written a check and hired a nanny and gone back to your billion-dollar empire? The question hung in the air between them, and Marcus couldn't answer it honestly because he didn't know. The man he'd been 8 years ago might have done exactly that. But the man he was now, looking at his dying ex-lover and the children he'd never known existed, that man knew he couldn't walk away. I don't know who I would have been, Marcus admitted, but I know who I am now. And right now, I'm the father of 2 8-year-old boys who are cold and scared and have been through hell. I'm the man who still loves the woman who gave birth to them, even if she hates me. And I'm someone who has the resources to fix this nightmare, if you'll just let me. Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might have passed out. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. They don't know, do they? The boys. They don't know you're their father. No, Marcus said. I don't think so. Not yet. Then maybe, Sarah said slowly, exhaustion weighing down every word. Maybe we should keep it that way. For now, until I'm better. Until I can think clearly. Until I can figure out if I can trust you not to break their hearts the way you broke mine. It hurt. God, it hurt more than anything Marcus had ever experienced. More than any business failure, any public humiliation, any loss. But he understood. He'd given up the right to their immediate trust the day he'd chosen ambition over family. Okay, he agreed, for now. But Sarah, you have to let me help. You have to come with me. Let doctors look at you. Let me get you and the boys somewhere safe and warm. Please, I'm begging you. Another coughing fit seized Sarah, this one worse than before. When it subsided, there was blood on her lips. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. I don't think, Sarah gasped, I have much choice anymore, do I? No, Marcus said gently, gathering her carefully in his arms. You don't. But I promise you, Sarah, I promise on our sons' lives, I will make this right. I will fix this, and I will prove to you that I'm not the man who let you walk away 8 years ago. As Marcus carried Sarah toward the Mercedes, her head resting against his chest, he could feel how wrong everything had gone. But he could also feel something else, determination, purpose. For the first time in 8 years, his life had meaning beyond the next deal, the next acquisition, the next billion. He had a family, and he was going to save them, no matter what it cost. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus had carried Sarah out from under that bridge, 3 weeks that had transformed everything. Mount Sinai's private wing had become a second home to Marcus, who'd barely left Sarah's side except when the boys needed him. The pneumonia had been worse than anyone initially thought, complicated by malnutrition and exhaustion, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic now that she was receiving proper treatment. Ethan and Evan were staying in Marcus's penthouse, though he'd moved them into the guest wing and hired a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez to care for them while he was at the hospital. The transformation in the boys over those 3 weeks had been remarkable. With regular meals, warm baths, clean clothes, and actual beds to sleep in, they'd started to look like normal 8-year-olds instead of street survivors. But they were still wary, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still unsure why this wealthy stranger was doing all of this for them. Marcus stood outside Sarah's hospital room, watching through the window as she slept. The colour had returned to her cheeks, and she'd gained back 7 pounds. Her hair, freshly washed and brushed, gleamed auburn in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. She looked more like the woman he'd fallen in love with 9 years ago, though there were new lines around her eyes and mouth, the permanent marks of hardship and worry. "Mr. Harrison, Doctor." Patricia Chen, Sarah's primary physician, approached with a tablet in hand. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course," Marcus said, though his eyes remained on Sarah. "Her latest tests came back. The pneumonia is responding well to treatment, and her nutritional levels are improving. We should be able to discharge her by the end of the week." Dr. Chen paused, studying Marcus's face. She's lucky you found her when you did. Another week or two out there, and we might be having a very different conversation. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. There's something else, Dr. Chen said carefully. Ms. Carter has been asking about the boys constantly. The separation anxiety is affecting her recovery. I know they've been visiting, but I think it would be beneficial if they could spend more time here. Children are remarkably healing. I'll bring them this afternoon, Marcus promised. As Dr. Chen walked away, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was Jennifer with an update on the private investigator he'd hired. Marcus had needed to know everything. How Sarah had ended up on the streets, what had happened in those 8 years, every detail of the struggle she'd faced alone. The report made for brutal reading. Sarah had worked as a nurse after they'd broken up, putting herself through school while pregnant. She'd had the twins at a charity hospital, stayed in nursing for 6 years, providing a modest but stable life for the boys. Then she'd been diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder that caused chronic fatigue. She'd lost her job when she couldn't maintain the demanding schedule. Medical bills piled up. She took 3 part-time jobs but couldn't keep up. Eviction, shelters, finally the streets. And through it all, she'd never once reached out to him. Pride, fear, hatred, probably all 3. You're here early. Sarah's weak voice pulled Marcus from his thoughts. She was awake, watching him through the window, with those knowing brown eyes. Marcus entered the room, pulling up the chair he'd practically lived in for 3 weeks. I'm always here early. You're always here, period, Sarah said, a hint of her old humor creeping into her voice. Don't you have a billion-dollar empire to run? I have excellent people handling things, Marcus said. Besides, nothing's more important than this, than you getting better. Sarah looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity in his voice. The boys asked about you yesterday. They wanted to know why you're doing all this. I didn't know what to tell them. What do you want to tell them? Marcus asked carefully. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers pleating the edge of her hospital blanket. The truth, I think. They deserve that. They've been through so much, lived with so many lies and secrets. They deserve to know that their father isn't some faceless man who abandoned them, but someone who simply didn't know they existed. Marcus felt his heart stop. You mean... I want to tell them today, Sarah interrupted. If you're willing, if you're ready. But Marcus... She turned to face him directly, her expression serious. If we do this, if we tell them you're their father, you can't walk away. Ever. I won't let you break their hearts. They've been through enough. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus said fiercely. Sarah, I swear to you... Don't swear, Sarah said softly. Just be there. That's all I'm asking. Just be there. 4 hours later, Ethan and Evan burst into Sarah's hospital room, with Mrs. Rodriguez trailing behind them apologetically. I tried to tell them to walk quietly, but... It's fine, Rosa, Sarah said, laughing as both boys carefully climbed onto her bed, hugging her gently. I've missed my little whirlwinds. Marcus watched from his usual chair, his heart full as he observed them together. Evan was telling Sarah about the video games he'd discovered in the penthouse, while Ethan showed her a drawing he'd made of a superhero that looked suspiciously like Marcus. Mom looks so much better, Evan said suddenly, turning to Marcus. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for everything. We can never pay you back, but someday when we're grown up, we'll try. You don't owe me anything, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. But why? Ethan asked, the question they'd all been dancing around for 3 weeks. Why are you helping us? People don't just do this. There has to be a reason. Sarah reached out and took both boys' hands. There is a reason, sweethearts. And it's time we told you the truth. She looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragement. Do you remember how you've always asked me about your father? About why he wasn't with us?" Both boys nodded, their expressions suddenly serious. "I told you that he was a good man, who had to go away, who didn't know about you. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." Sarah's voice shook slightly. "Your father didn't go away. I left him before either of you were born because I was scared and proud and thought I could do everything alone, and I never told him about you because I thought it was better that way." "Where is he now?" Evan asked quietly. "Our father?" Sarah smiled through tears. "He's sitting right there." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan and Evan turned slowly to look at Marcus, their identical faces showing identical expressions of shock and confusion and something that might have been hope. "Mr. Harrison," Ethan whispered, You're our dad." Marcus couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He nodded, and then both boys were off the bed and in his arms, and he was holding them, his sons, for the first time knowing who they truly were. The tears he'd been holding back for 3 weeks finally fell. "Why didn't you tell us?" Evan asked, his face pressed against Marcus's shoulder. "Because your mother wanted to be sure I was worthy of being your father," Marcus said honestly. "And she was right to wait. I had to prove that I wasn't going to leave, that I was going to be there for you always." "Are you?" Ethan pulled back to look Marcus in the eye. "Going to be there always?" "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "I know I missed the first 8 years of your lives, and I can never get that time back. But I promise you, from this moment forward, I will be there for every single day, every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee, every nightmare, every triumph. I will be your father in every way that matters." "Even when we mess up?" Evan asked seriously. "Even when we do something wrong?" "Especially then," Marcus said. "Being a father means showing up for the hard times too, not just the easy ones." Sarah was crying openly now, watching her sons embrace their father. Mrs. Rodriguez had quietly slipped out to give them privacy. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things might actually be okay. "I have so many questions," Ethan said, pulling back from the hug but staying close. "Like, do we have to call you Dad now? And are we going to live with you? And do you know how to play video games? And—" "One at a time," Marcus laughed, a sound of pure joy. "You can call me whatever feels comfortable. And yes, if it's okay with your mother, I'd like you to live with me. I'd like us to be a real family." "What about Mom?" Evan asked, looking between his parents. "Is she going to live with us too?" The adults exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed this yet. The logistics of what happened after Sarah was discharged, the elephant in the room. "Your mother and I need to figure some things out," Marcus said carefully. "But regardless of where she lives, you'll see her every single day." "That's not negotiable." "I think," Sarah said slowly, "we should take things one step at a time. First, I need to finish getting better. Then we'll figure out the rest. But boys, I need you to understand something important. Just because Marcus is your father doesn't mean everything is perfect now. Adults are complicated, and relationships are messy, and there's a lot of hurt between your father and me that will take time to heal." "But you don't hate him, do you?" Ethan asked worriedly. "Because we really like him. He's been really nice to us." Sarah looked at Marcus, really looked at him, for the first time since that day under the bridge. She saw the regret in his eyes, the determination, the love he already had for these boys he'd only just discovered, and underneath all the hurt and anger and resentment, she found something she'd thought was long dead, a spark of the feeling that had brought them together in the first place. "No," she said softly. "I don't hate him. I never did. I was hurt and angry and scared, but I never hated him." "Then maybe," Evan said with the simple wisdom of childhood, "you guys could try being friends first. That's what our teacher says. If people are mad at each other, they should try being friends and work up from there." Marcus laughed. "Your teacher sounds very wise." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of questions and answers, of tears and laughter, of the beginnings of something that might someday become a real family. Marcus told the boys stories about his own childhood, about building his business, about the things he loved to do. The twins told him about their favorite subjects in school before they'd had to leave, their dreams, their fears. As evening fell and the boys finally fell asleep, Ethan curled up on Sarah's bed, Evan in Marcus's lap in the chair. Sarah watched them with wonder. "I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered. "Under that bridge, coughing up blood, watching my boys starve. I thought this was how our story ended." "It's not an ending," Marcus said softly, careful not to wake Evan. "It's a beginning, for all of us." 6 months had passed since that rainy afternoon when 2 desperate boys stole sandwiches from a billionaire's table. 6 months that had rewritten every chapter of their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Marcus stood in the doorway of the twins' bedroom, a room he'd personally designed with them, filled with bunk beds they'd chosen together, shelves overflowing with books, and a window overlooking Central Park. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains as Ethan and Evan got ready for their first day at Riverside Academy, one of Manhattan's best private schools. "Dad, can you help me with this tie?" Ethan called out, struggling with the navy blue school uniform tie. "Dad." The word still made Marcus's heart swell every single time he heard it. He crossed the room and knelt in front of his son, carefully fixing the tie, while Evan watched from his spot on the lower bunk, already perfectly dressed. "You're getting better at this," Marcus said, remembering how he'd had to tie both boys' ties every single day for the first month. "Soon you won't need me at all." "We'll always need you, Dad," Evan said matter-of-factly. "That's what families do. They need each other." The wisdom in those simple words, spoken by an 8-year-old who'd lived through more hardship than most adults, never failed to humble Marcus. These boys had taught him more about what truly mattered in 6 months than he'd learned in 42 years. "Is Mom awake yet?" Ethan asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "I want her to see us in our uniforms before we leave." "She's in the kitchen," Marcus said, smiling, "making your favorite breakfast last I checked." The boys raced out of the room, and Marcus followed at a more leisurely pace, savoring the sounds of their laughter echoing through the penthouse that had once been silent and empty. He paused at the living room window, looking out over the city that had nearly swallowed his family whole. From up here, you couldn't see the underpasses where people lived in desperation, but Marcus would never forget. He'd started a foundation, the Carter Family Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless families, with Sarah as its director once she'd fully recovered. In the kitchen, Sarah stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while the boys bounced excitedly around her. She'd gained back all the weight she'd lost, and then some, and her auburn hair, now cut in a stylish shoulder-length bob, gleamed with health. She wore jeans and a soft blue sweater, looking more like the woman Marcus had fallen in love with than he'd thought possible 6 months ago. But it was more than her physical recovery that took his breath away. It was the light in her eyes, the easy smile, the way she moved without pain or fear, the way she'd slowly, cautiously let him back into her heart. "Look at my handsome men," Sarah exclaimed as the boys showed off their uniforms. "You two are going to be the smartest kids in that whole school." "Mom, you say that every day." Evan laughed, but he was beaming with pride. "Because it's true every day," Sarah countered, plating pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse heads, a skill she'd perfected over the past months. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, just watching. This This was what he'd been missing all those years he'd been building his empire. Not the deals or the accolades or the money, though he was grateful for the money now, grateful it could give his family security and opportunity. But this, the ordinary magic of a Tuesday morning, of pancakes and school uniforms and the easy rhythm of family life, this was the treasure he'd been too blind to see. "Earth to Marcus," Sarah said, waving a spatula at him with a teasing smile. "You going to stand there all morning, or are you going to join us?" He crossed to the table, dropping a kiss on each boy's head before taking his seat. Sarah set a plate in front of him, and their hands brushed. The touch sent a familiar spark through him, one that had been building steadily over these 6 months of learning to be a family, of late-night conversations after the boys were asleep, of slowly rebuilding trust, and maybe, just maybe, something more. "Big day today," Marcus said, cutting into his pancakes. "First day of school. How are you guys feeling?" "Nervous," Ethan admitted. "What if the other kids don't like us?" "What if they ask where we lived before?" Evan added quietly. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. They'd talked about this, prepared for it. The boys' past wasn't something to be ashamed of, but they were still processing the trauma of those months on the streets. "If anyone asks," Sarah said gently, "you tell them the truth, that your family went through a hard time, but you're together now, and that's what matters. And if anyone is mean about it, you tell a teacher, and you tell us, and we'll handle it, together." "Besides," Marcus added, "I have a feeling you two are going to make friends so fast you won't have time to worry. You're smart, you're kind, you're funny. What's not to like?" "Dad's right," Sarah said. "You've survived things that would break most adults. A little thing like school is nothing you can't handle." After breakfast, Marcus drove the boys to Riverside Academy in his Mercedes, the same car that had taken them from under that bridge to their new life. But unlike that first desperate drive, this one was filled with chatter and excitement, and the twins' endless questions about what school would be like. When they pulled up to the impressive brick building, Marcus saw other parents dropping off their children, wealthy New Yorkers in expensive cars, kids with designer backpacks. 6 months ago, this world would have seemed impossible for Ethan and Evan. Now, it was their reality. But as Marcus walked his sons to the entrance, he noticed something that made his chest tight with emotion. The boys weren't impressed by the wealth or intimidated by the grandeur. They were just excited to learn, to make friends, to be normal kids. The experience of having nothing had taught them that possessions didn't define worth, a lesson many of these other children might never learn. "Dad," Ethan said, hesitating at the school entrance, "you'll be here when school ends, right?" "I'll be right here," Marcus promised, kneeling down to their level. 3 o'clock sharp. Both Mum and I will be here." "Promise?" Evan asked. "Promise," Marcus said firmly. "Boys, I will always be here when you need me. That's not just a promise for today. That's a promise for every day for the rest of your lives." Both boys hugged him tightly, then ran off to join a group of kids their age who were heading inside. Marcus watched until they disappeared through the doors, his heart full of pride and fear and overwhelming love. When he returned to the penthouse, Sarah was in the living room, organizing files for the foundation. She'd thrown herself into the work with characteristic determination, turning her own painful experience into a mission to help others. Marcus had never been prouder of anyone in his life. "How'd they do?" Sarah asked, looking up from her laptop. "They were perfect," Marcus said, sitting down beside her on the couch, brave and excited, and so ready for this. "We did good," Sarah said softly, "getting them here, giving them this chance." "You did good," Marcus corrected. "Sarah, you kept them alive through hell. You taught them to be kind and brave and good, despite everything you all went through. I just provided resources." "You provided more than that," Sarah said, turning to face him fully. "You gave them a father. You gave them stability and love and a future. Marcus, 6 months ago, I was dying under a bridge, watching my children starve, believing we had no hope, and now—" Her voice broke. "Now I wake up every morning in a safe place. My boys are healthy and happy and going to school, and I have work that matters. You gave us our lives back." "We gave each other our lives back," Marcus said, taking her hand. "Sarah, before I found you, before I found them, I was successful but empty. I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. You and the boys reminded me what it means to be human, to be connected, to love something more than success." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands intertwined, looking out over the city that had tried to destroy them, but had ultimately brought them together again. "I've been thinking," Sarah said carefully, "about what comes next. For us, I mean. Not the boys. We're doing great with them. But you and me." Marcus's heart started pounding. They'd been dancing around this for weeks now, the unspoken question of whether they were rebuilding more than just a family, whether they were rebuilding them. "I've been thinking about that too," Marcus admitted. "We're not the same people we were 9 years ago," Sarah continued. "You've changed. God knows I've changed. Everything's different now." "Different how?" Marcus asked, afraid of the answer, but needing to hear it. Sarah smiled, and it was the smile he'd fallen in love with all those years ago, warm and genuine and full of hope. "Different better. Marcus, I spent 8 years angry at you, resenting you for not being there. But the truth is, the man you were back then wasn't ready to be a father, wasn't ready for the kind of love and commitment a family requires. You're ready now. I can see it in everything you do with the boys, in how you've completely restructured your life around them." "They're my priority," Marcus said simply. "They always will be." "I know," Sarah said, "and that's why I think maybe we could try. Not just co-parenting, but actually being together. Building something real, starting over, but smarter this time. More honest, more careful with each other's hearts." Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I forgive you," Sarah interrupted, tears streaming down her face now. "I forgive you for not being ready 9 years ago. I forgive you for the things you said, for the time we lost. And more than that, I think I'm falling in love with you again, with the man you've become, the father you are, the partner you're showing me you can be." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her like he'd wanted to hold her for 6 months, for 8 years, for forever. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I never stopped loving you, Sarah. And I promise I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving that you can trust me with your heart." They kissed then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, a kiss that held 8 years of loss and 6 months of healing, and the promise of a future they'd both thought was impossible. 3 o'clock came faster than Marcus expected. He and Sarah pulled up to Riverside Academy together, and within seconds, Ethan and Evan came bursting through the doors, their faces lit up with excitement. "Mom! Dad! School was amazing!" Ethan shouted, racing to the car. "I made 3 friends," Evan added, "and the teacher said I'm really good at math." As the boys piled into the back seat, chattering over each other about their day, Sarah reached over and took Marcus's hand. He glanced at her, saw the joy and peace in her expression, and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been restless and searching for his entire adult life. This was it. This was what success really looked like. Not magazine covers or billion-dollar deals or penthouse apartments. Success was 2 8-year-old boys arguing happily about who had better pizza at lunch. Success was the woman you loved sitting beside you, her hand in yours. Success was knowing that when you went home, it wasn't to an empty apartment, but to a family, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. That evening, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, Marcus stood in the doorway of the twins' room, watching them sleep. Sarah came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You know what the best part of this whole thing is," she whispered. "What's that?" "They'll never remember the bad times as clearly as they'll remember this, the family we built, the love we gave them, the life we created together. This is what they'll carry with them forever." Marcus turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance, for raising our sons to be incredible humans despite my absence, for letting me be part of this family, for loving me again when you had every reason not to." Sarah smiled through tears. "We all deserve second chances, Marcus. That's what I learned through all of this, that life isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. It's about forgiveness and redemption and believing that tomorrow can be better than yesterday." "Tomorrow will be better," Marcus promised. "Every tomorrow for the rest of our lives." And as they stood there in the hallway of their home, their sons sleeping peacefully in the next room, the city lights twinkling outside, Marcus Harrison finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy, not in money or power or success, but in love, in family, in the second chances that transform tragedy into triumph. 6 months ago, 2 desperate boys had stolen food from his table. Today, they'd stolen his heart and given him everything that mattered in return. The end